The first sheet is a seating chart without seats. It lives in a folder that smells of paste and coal dust, stamped 3 times with names that change their grammar: All Union, Central, Supreme. Across the top, in a confident hand, Extraordinary Convocation of the Party, June, year 196. The last digit is rubbed into a shine by an eraser. Below, neat rows of blocks labeled by Republic and Industry, the Buryats beside Aviation, the Moldavians beside Shipyards, each block annotated with numbers that imply chairs, aisles, delegates breathing into one room. At the bottom, a note in blue pencil. Banners requisitioned X36, portable microphones X12, translation headsets FRDE delayed. The requisition receipts exist. Rail consignments signed at Chelyabinsk, customs waivers stamped at Sverdlovsk Station 2, fuel allocations for intercity motor coaches, priority. Hotels in Sverdlovsk report linen shortages that week. A bakery doubles its yeast order. A photo lab in the Uralmash district buys extra paper. The newsreel schedules, so precise for Jubilees and 1st of May parades, open a clean blank artery through the calendar. And yet there is no poster, no headline, no photograph of a rostrum under spotlights. The convocation does not exist in the press. It exists where the press borrows its paper. The story begins, officially, with an audit that wanted lamp oil and found minutes. A Ministry of Light Industry inspector, counting napkins in a textile combine, found a crate labeled with a theater's inventory number. Inside, seat numbers in enamel, a box of brass screws, and a program printed in a font reserved for state funerals. The cover says, Convocation, Order of Proceedings. The pages inside are blank, except for page numbers that go to 112 and then stop as if a stagehand had fallen asleep over the ink. The inspector noted the anomaly and sent the program to Moscow in a pouch that carried bolts of cloth and a taste of copper. Weeks later, a man with a suitcase collected it and left behind a receipt for miscellaneous. His badge belonged to an office that liked its initial consonants hard. The combine stored the crate under a staircase with buckets and salt. In the central archive, the convocation appears like a watermark across unrelated papers. A dining hall in Aramil lists breakfast for 412 delegations, paid by a ministry that does not feed. An airport at Koltsovo slots extra slots for special arrivals that never clear customs. A radio jamming schedule marks reserve band for internal relay, Ural, and the day in question shows a penciled spiral that means nothing formal and everything to men who have worked static. A requisition for red bunting, 500 meters, signs out to House of Culture number 5, Kot, Sverdlovsk 44, a closed city's euphemism. The town index for Sverdlovsk 44 has been cut from the book with a knife that knew its work. Witnesses speak in the grammar of rooms. A janitor from a House of Culture outside Nizhny Tagil recalls the smell of varnish and thunder and the way the floor made a sound when men in shoes stopped at once. He remembers being told to keep the windows shut in heat and to run the fans. He remembers drivers asleep on benches, their caps folded under their heads like contraband. He does not remember speeches. He remembers an electrician whispering, "We will rehearse the lights once, then not again." A caterer who delivered to a canteen under a clock describes soup for 700 and bread for 9. They asked for second tables, she says, but no music. A man who printed credentials in a basement under a newspaper office remembers the color stock prepared in 4 shades: steel, barley, brick, sky, and how the form said occupation, where the party always wrote service. He adds privately that the clipping room went quiet as a chapel when the date approached, and the jammers hummed like bees. A stenographer from the Sverdlovsk Regional Committee confirms nothing and gives a detail. They borrowed us for a week, she says, for an event with translated channels. We prepared shorthand pads and pencils and sat where we were assigned. We took down nothing. The microphones were tested and retested. We were dismissed with extra coupons and told to forget our chairs. She remembers, instead of speeches, the way the translators yawned at the same time around midnight and the odor of warm metal from the floor under the rostrum. Her friend, the one who put salt on the radiators in winter, said that night her ears felt full, the way they do before trains. The stenographer laughed then, and does not laugh now. Denial arranges itself as arithmetic. The Central Press Department issues lists of past Congresses with years re-stamped and extraordinary scratched into a note that points nowhere. A propaganda poster series jumps in serial numbers. A Komsomol pamphlet about victories of planning refers in passing to the line set at Convocation, then is reissued with the line removed and an extra comma where a clause used to be. Radio archives contain a band of silence between Uzbek folk music at 10:02 and a weather bulletin about the dawn at 10:15. The silence bears the signature of professional quiet, not a fault. A newsreel can in Leningrad labeled Steel. Summer contains instead 2 minutes of men wheelbarrowing chairs under dim light, then scratches and nothing. The can was never logged out. The studio's ledger has a page torn cleanly to its binding threads. In the Urals that week, weather made itself official. Barometers held steady, though thunder marched on 3 horizons. Birds turned once in air and settled facing a building with windows covered in paper. A crew laying cable along a tram line found the ground intelligent with resonance at ankle height and leaned their shovels in a fan against a wall and smoked without speaking. At the machine factory in Verkhnyaya Pishma, turners at lathes found chips fall in curls like shaving cream and stick to their cuffs. A hospital recorded a string of births that came a day early and 3 migraines that resolved when the wind changed. A village between the slag heaps and the river reported foxes moving in single file along the fences of a house of culture as if keeping count. The KGB major assigned to culture vandalism wrote with polite regret. Rumor density increased, he noted. Theme, secret Congress in closed city, and delegates who do not arrive but are counted. He recommended prophylaxis, films at canteens, excursions to reservoirs, a public ceremony for library acquisitions. He added, in pencil in bad faith, posters to be printed Saturday for Sunday to preempt. The printing press in the basement under the newspaper office took order and moved its rollers with oil that smelled like soap. It printed, according to a receipt that smells of mold, 50 posters welcoming no one by name. When the date circled itself on calendars, hotels filed receipts for late check-ins that never slept in sheets. The Sverdlovsk 44 registry recorded guests under functions instead of surnames. Tundra, iron, river, graphite, bread. The desk clerk wrote down the room numbers as if the act were an oath. They did not bring suitcases, she says to a camera now. They brought folders that made the air taste like keys. She remembers a truck delivering flowers to the House of Culture that afternoon, red gladiolus, and the driver saying, "No wreaths," as if correcting an insult. The hall itself appears only indirectly, in a line item for temporary enrichment of sound stage, in a requisition of heavy curtains for acoustic control, in a complaint from a city power dispatcher about an unannounced smooth load that behaved like a motor that refused to show itself. A blueprint on onion skin shows a proscenium chalked with circles like targets and dotted with microphone symbols. 12. A pencil writes, "Simultaneous translation cabin, North Gallery," then crosses it with a line that doubles back, the way a man crosses himself when he has forgotten the words. The engineer's name is a thin stroke that could be Kovalev. The onion skin has been folded into quarters and smells faintly of iodine and varnish. The minutes do not survive. Their ghost does. In the archives of the Sverdlovsk Conservatory, a building that kept scraps better than ministries, a thin stack of dictation discs labeled with days of June carries a one-line label in measured script. Convocation, sound test. A teacher who once trained piano tuners says he heard only a room, not a speaker. A room breathing between prompts. "We tuned for A," he says, and the air favored another pitch. He repeats the word air, like a student trying out a new vowel. In a world where tape wears, platters shatter, and words are clipped by scissors that answer to no one, this is what remains. Lists of chairs without chairs, posters for welcoming no one, receipts for flowers for a room that was never on the program, a hall that breathed and warmed its floor without speeches. And so the dossier opens with an event recorded as if it had breathed once and decided not to exhale. The extraordinary Convocation, a Congress that appears in pipes and jammers, linen counts, and canteen schedules, but not on paper, meant for people. Did a closed city rehearse nationhood without witnesses? Did the party convene a roll call of functions and dismiss them before voice? Or is this only a shadow of something that used the party's calendar as a mask and a hall's lungs as a stage? The next sheets smell of summer and varnish and carry the handwriting of drivers, clerks, and men with suitcases. They will tell you what they hauled, whom they were told not to see, and which window blinds were lowered at noon. They will not tell you what was said at a rostrum that, if it existed, never learned names, only nouns. The opening orders wear dates that almost touch. A Central Committee telegram, carbon faint, still legible, directs Sverdlovsk to receive delegations of functional sectors for extraordinary proceedings, date floating, provide sleeping capacity 1,200 beds, canteen throughput 3,000 servings day, translation channels 4, ensure jamming coverage EO6, EO24 DIRS on reserve band. The signatory is a secretary whose surname is always clean where photocopiers smudge others. A second wire, routed through a ministry that does not admit audiences, allocates 40 intercity coaches and 30 ZIL trucks to culture facilities Nos 3, 5, and 12. In the margin of a depot ledger, a dispatcher writes simply, 40 buses cannot be folklore. Security drew a cordon like a belt through neighborhoods that had learned to ignore belts. Militia posts at every second intersection. A moving screen of men from the 9th Directorate at side doors. Fire engines parked as if awaiting drill. Their tanks full and their crews not smoking for once. A memo from the 5th Directorate warned against ideological exploitation of unusual movement, then assigned 2 officers to stand at Koltsovo arrivals, with flowers for any foreign who wandered onto the wrong bus. The airport's ramp schedule shows specials with registry blanks and fuel receipts that round up. The tower recorded weather denies visuals during hours of blue. Delegations, if that's what they were, appeared in records as functions, not people. Factory Trust Uralred charged out 38-day wages to graphite, oil, wheat storage, precipitation chemistry, and cinema projection. A boarding house on Bajova logged Chukotka mining into 4 rooms and sent up kettles and a request for silence after 10. The concierge, who had seen party schools pack in men by the dozen, remarked later that these slept one to a bed and left shoes pointing outward like soldiers. She found under a chair a lapel pin that said only River. She wore it for a week and then gave it to a cousin at the tram depot, who gave it to a boy. It did not photograph well. Inside House of Culture number 5, the stage crew chalked the floor. Circles for microphone stands, 12 for a room accustomed to 2. A heavy blackout curtain newly hung to tame echo. A carpenter's complaint about a rostrum that must bear dynamic load, and a note to reinforce from beneath. The electrician drew a new feeder line from a substation and labeled it motor, even though this was theater. The power dispatcher's log shows a smooth 3.8 Mendabur rise at Aero 910 and a descent at 1740, a shape like a day at a factory, except the factory's whistle never blew. He called to confirm and was told not to call again. Translators arrived from Moscow with leather cases and sleepiness and were shown to a gallery where temporary booths had been set up with plywood and earnestness. Headsets in 4 languages, German, French, Polish, and auxiliary, checked on a loop. A rehearsal note. Channel 2 produces side tone, Channel 4 clean, microphones 3 and 7 intermittent, tape machines A and C, record room tone only. The stenographers, 24 assigned, 2 per channel, in shifts, took seats, and tested pencils on the backs of their pads, writing the alphabet once to wake wrists. A woman with a voice that carried stood on the stage and counted into 12 microphones from 1 to 100, and every 10 numbers she paused to ask whether Channel 4 could hear her. No one wrote the numbers down. They wrote, "Voice present." Jammers stood on their marks. The Spectrum duty chart shows reserve band from 41 to 43 megahertz. Low power weave, pinned across 8 hours with a lunch gap like an eyelid. Radio monitors in the basement under the newspaper office logged foreign services as attenuated, domestic as nominal, internal as quiet. One tape, labeled internal relay, is 60 minutes of air that occasionally trembles. A technician, bored unto honesty, tapped his pencil on the console at the quarter hour. The pencil taps print. In the middle, a floorboard creaks. 30 seconds later, another. The technician is reprimanded for not oiling his chair. Food moved like belief. Canteens near the hall recorded soup, bread, stewed meat, kasha, kefir. 700 servings at noon, 900 in the evening. The bakery doubled yeast but not flour. A dairy truck from a closed address delivered 10 crates of cream with no form. The driver signed bread. A butcher's invoice lists awful for factory dogs, double-weighted and stamped urgent. 2 hours later, a kennel behind the hall is empty and quiet, as if it had lent its noise to the room. Weather performed obedience. Wind held west by decree. Thunder walked around the suburbs without touching roofs. Sparrows, there are always sparrows even in industrial winds, turned once and faced the entrance as if reading a cue card. A hospital 3 blocks away scheduled elective surgeries before noon, and afterward recorded nurses napping between shifts with dreams of stairwells. The nurse who kept her pencils in a mug says that day bones felt light, which she disliked. She wrote nothing. She boiled tea. She hummed to the radiator. The radiator hummed back. The opening minutes of the convocation in the calendar pass like a procession we are told to look away from. No banner is unfurled for camera. No first secretary clears his throat. No MC explains the historicity, yet the checklist boxes tick themselves, security sealed, translation up, sound checked, light rehearsed, power flowing, food hot. A man from Moscow with a square tie and a round face signed a page and wrote, "Commence," left blank for whom. The person at the tape machines pressed record and the reels turned, and later the reels were labeled room and shelved, and the label glue turned brown, and the boxes fell to the back of a cupboard, until an archivist cleaning his office after retirement found them and wrote a note that smelled of iodine and wondered who had asked a room to speak. Outside, buses idled and did not load. Drivers smoked and did not talk and stared into a middle distance where prizes are imagined. A squad with armbands directed pedestrians away from the square and toward a fountain that had been shut off. A boy on a bicycle wove between back wheels until a man with a cap-like discipline placed a hand on the handlebar and turned him around without speaking. The boy later drew a stage with no people and a banner with no words and was told to try airplanes instead. The first break came without speeches to digest. The canteen filled and emptied, while a corridor in the hall caught its breath. A translator wrote on her pad, "interval," and tucked it under her chair. The stenographers sharpened pencils they had not needed and compared the texture of erasers and did not ask one another what they were doing in a place where language refused to begin. The electrician crawled under the rostrum and put a palm to a beam to feel whether heat had crept there and withdrew it as if polite. The power dispatcher chalked a second load pattern that matched the first. The man from Moscow with the square tie stamped the word "continue" on a line below a line that held no words. Koltsovo logged departure slots for aircraft that taxied to the runway, turned, and taxied back. The ramp man wrote "traffic jam" and drew a smile in the margin. A radio operator asked to file a local NOTAM for a temporary acoustic demonstration and was told the word demonstration belonged to other forms. A weather bulletin spoke of a change due at midnight, and was held because midnight is proof, and proof was unfashionable that week. Then the rostrum did what rostrums do when attended. It held light. The sound, if there was sound, stayed in the room. The opening phase of the convocation ended by not beginning. The sheets in the folder that follow it shift into committee notes and security amendments and anonymous memoranda that speak as if speeches had been made. Line set at convocation, policy affirmed, functions ratified, cadence approved. Cadence is underlined twice. Who said cadence? No minister signs it. A stagehand initialed an order to strike platforms after dark, no applause, and added, in the space beyond the margin, we rehearsed the lights once, then not again. The opening happened the way fog happens. It fills a room, makes outlines honest, leaves no fingerprints, and counts as weather. In Sverdlovsk that week, weather had a schedule and sat in the best seat. Planning papers speak as if decisions were predicates detached from subjects. A concept of proceedings, stamped with the Central Committee's seal and a ministry's initials that have since been renamed, defines the convocation's aim, without naming it, to harmonize functions under a cadence. The word cadence appears in a paragraph that otherwise worships nouns like plan and output. Marginalia in pencil, another hand, avoid enumeration. A logistics annex lists arrivals by sectors rather than surnames. River, 12, graphite, 9, wheat, 14, coal, 19, light, 7, metrology, 4, power, 11. A typed note adds military representation, observer, and leaves the number blank. In a second folder, someone has penciled the number 3 and then rubbed it until the paper shines. Command structures are drawn like seating, a presidium of functions at the rostrum, sectoral presidiums arrayed below, translation booths annotated FRDEPLAUX, stenographers placed by channels rather than parties. Nowhere does the word party appear without an adjective. A KGB interoffice memo cautions against parasite vocabularies, frequencies borrowed by foreign broadcasters, terms borrowed by philosophers. Attachments instruct the jamming service to lace reserve band with weave only, avoid continuous carriers. The same memo orders photographers to shoot architecture in crowds only and avoid faces with microphones. Preparations mix the mystical with the measurable. The power dispatcher's sketch shows redundancies. A feeder from Substation 6, another from Substation Tram, a diesel set behind House of Culture number 5 that will pick up at 10% without flicker. The sound engineer's note lists 12 microphones, and then, oddly, a 13th. Floor. He draws a rectangle on the stage and writes, Wood speaks. The lighting plan specifies no spot follow, only washes, no heads to track, only a room to light. The hall's acoustic treatment order requests heavy velvet black, which arrives labeled theater funeral in a supplier's ledgers. Propaganda drafts exist and then do not. A poster maquette shows a rostrum and a banner that reads, a line without index. It is crossed out in blue and replaced by a blank ribbon. A radio script calls the gathering an extraordinary meeting of the nation's functions under the leadership of reason, a phrasing no censors would sign. The script is replaced with weather and a recital by a child's chorus. An editor's instruction, do not say Congress, do not say Convocation, say Culture Week. Security rehearses like theater. Timetables allocate delayed arrivals. Buses to circle 3 times before unloading, so that bystanders count more than they see. Motor coaches park tail to tail to form a corridor behind the hall. Couriers with satchels labeled with geometric shapes, circle, square, triangle, run between translation booths and a room marked Only Air. A guard rota forbids 2 consecutive nights on the north door to prevent habituation. Another order instructs the kennel to move dogs during proceedings. The order is stamped fulfilled, but veterinary logs show no animals treated that week. The kennel's ledger carries 3 pages of nothing thriftily ruled. Inside the hall, a rehearsal that is not called a rehearsal. A woman stands at the rostrum and reads numbers into 12 microphones, 1 to 100, so translators can set levels. Say a sentence, someone calls. She says, "This sentence will not be remembered." Pencils write, "Level stable, channel 2 echoes, the floor warms at 70. The electrician notes a soft rise under the rostrum. The stenographers practice silence. They write room tone on the first line of their pads, then leave the rest blank, then turn the page and do it again. A technician tapes "Do not count" on the booth wall above channel AUX. Miscalculations leak as minor repairs. A seating chart assumes 20 chairs for wheat. The canteen order feeds 25. The coat room checks 28. A pallet of headsets lost between Koltsovo and the House of Culture reappears with a customs stamp from a closed factory, whose gate guard swears he never stamped anything. The radio jamming weave produces a side tone that seeps into a police dispatcher net. For an hour, patrol cars answer with a hum instead of a word. The dispatcher writes "interference from culture building," then crosses out the noun and leaves the interference. The city learns new itineraries for the week. Tram lines adjusted to deposit riders away from the square. A cinema announces a matinee for workers of distant regions and screens a documentary about dams. The House of Political Education offers a noon lecture on bread storage and a concert of wind instruments in the evening. The wind instruments warm up directly below the translation booths. A child hears through an open door a chord that does not belong to wind and asks his mother if factories sing. She tells him to eat. Intelligence estimates come boxed in restraint. A summary to a secretary warns of foreign interest in extraordinary proceedings, lists 3 names at embassies and 2 in Prague, recommends no long exposures outside. A second note warns of local prurience, advises bringing collective farm delegates in via night trains to dilute rumor with routine. A response appears: functions, not farms. The word farms is underlined twice. A third hand adds, remove nouns where possible, keep verbs. Public sentiment is measured by the price of bread and the length of queue. That week, queues curve but do not tangle. In kitchens, women remark that streets look like Sundays. Men say the jammers are busy. The radio is cotton. A nurse writes a line in her notebook, dreams of stairwells, strikes it out, writes instead, T-short. The barometer holds. The thunder walks around. By the last planning meeting, the verbs have learned to act alone. Proceed, commence, ratify cadence, affirm line. A footnote directs, strike platforms after dark. No applause, no outdoor dispersal. A final page, unsigned, says, if asked, Culture Week, closed city schedule. If pressed, rehearsal for Festival of Industry. If recorded, weather. The page smells faintly of varnish and iodine and has been folded twice across the middle. When unfolded, a faint impression remains. It reads like a stage direction. The hall inhales. The plan answers, obediently, do not count. The day arrives without posters. At 8:40, buses idle in lanes that yesterday were not lanes. Men with folders stand in clumps and face a door that does not yet exist, because the facade is still draped in blackout velvet. The House of Culture's doorman holds a register with lines labeled not by names but by functions. River, coal, power, bread, graphite, light, metrology. Pens hesitate above blanks, then make check marks that look like rain. A woman from translation counts receivers and, instead of numbers, says, enough, as if to trick arithmetic. An officer from the 9th Directorate rehearses a smile that does not require eyes. The jammers hum like bees inside cotton. At 09:10, the smooth load appears in the dispatcher's panel, a rise without teeth, factory-shaped and nameless. Inside, the curtain opens to reveal only wall. The rostrum lights come up in a wash. No MC, no anthem. A floor microphone breathes. The sound engineer writes, room tone captures speech that is not present, then crosses out speech. Stenographers write room and turn the page. Translators listen to channel AUX for a phrase to begin their work. The channel offers a sound like a hand across wood. In the gallery, a woman whispers, "We will not remember this sentence. Truer now by absence than as practice." Delegations move as if to seats they have rehearsed in dreams. River takes left center, power opposite, bread near the aisle. Cole, unaccustomed to stages, chooses the rear and hunches. Military observers sit in a shade of uniform designed to look like ordinary cloth. The stage manager signals with his left hand, downstage left, then pretends it was about lights. A man from metrology taps his wristwatch and finds it obedient until the room asks it a question. For 12 seconds, it considers. Outside, first engagements are small and specific. A driver skids a crate of glass into the canteen and every bottle sings the same pitch as if obedience had been rehearsed. In the hospital, a patient coming out of anesthesia whispers a word not hers and then grouses at the temperature. A tram stops 1 meter short of its mark, holds, arrives, opens doors. Birds sit on the line and face the hall. The rain that was supposed to arrive at 10 decides on noon. Inside, someone, not identified on any diagram, places both hands on the rostrum and looks down as if inspecting carpentry. He speaks or does not. The microphones take the room and lay it on tape. Translators, faithful to employment, produce language anyway. Comrades, functions, cadence, line. Their words, netted by headphones, bounce and return as side tone that makes even trained mouths doubt verbs. The military observer, one of three or not, scribbles "cadence affirmed" on a pad that does not belong to him and underlines CAD twice, as if the root matters. Unexpected outcomes announce themselves by what does not happen. No applause, though hands know when to meet. No slogans, though banners lean into the air like prompts. No interruptions from zeal or fear. The floor warms under the rostrum at an even rate. The electrician, who crawls under to watch a cable head, withdraws his palm and does not write the word warm. The power dispatcher scratches another identical rise and fall onto paper and stares at twins that ought to have parents. Territorial changes belong to rumor. The closed city grows by a block in speech. Toward the river, say taxi drivers, who avoid a street that yesterday they didn't. A factory clock runs 4 minutes shy and corrects at a time that matches the canteen's lull. A clerk in Sverdlovsk 44 stamps guest cards with functions and later cannot find the box with surnames to reverse it. In a village beyond the slag, foxes move from fence to fence in a sequence that makes an old man count aloud, then stop at 10 because of the rule. Morale is measured by breathing. The hall breathes obediently. The translators yawn together at 11 truths and do not take offense. The stenographer's heart slow on the floor's warmth and speed at the bell for lunch, though no bell rings. The janitor, whose job is to step in with a mop when rooms admit spills, leans on the handle and knows with certainty that there will be nothing to wipe. He knocks 3 times on the radiator behind the stage because habit keeps men standing. The radiator answers with silence that has corners. By 12:10, the first session ends by continuing. Delegations file out past curtains, heavy enough for funerals. In the canteen, soup waits without skin. Bread goes in pairs to tables of 4. No one says historic. A radio plays a child's chorus recorded last year, and the air prefers the key under it. Outside, the buses idle for a while, and then shut down. The jammers roll their weave across a band no one will admit. The opening conflicts between program and weather, between nouns and functions, have been decided without votes. The afternoon looks identical on paper. The city, which was not asked, answers by holding its breath for exactly the time it takes a stage to forget a sentence. By mid-afternoon, the city behaved as if an exercise had become doctrine. Security thickened without spectacle. Additional posts at intersections, a cordon 1 block wider around house number 5, a radio order for patrols to walk diagonals, not perimeters. A second reserve band came alive at 15, 43, 45 meters, low power weave, logged as maintenance. Koltsovo added 3 specials with registry blanks. 2 taxied, turned, and returned. 1 remained at a far stand with stairs deployed and no passengers. A fresh requisition sent 12 additional buses to Culture Facility Number 12. A depot ledger shows fuel for 480 kilometers, issued on the understanding the coaches would circle rather than park. Inside, reinforcement looked like repetition. The load graph at the dispatcher's desk drew a third rise identical to the morning's. The electrician under the rostrum noted soft rise again and did not write it. Translators rotated 2 off, 2 on, while Channel AUX reported a room that continued to prefer the key below A. Stenographers replaced pads, wrote room on the first line, turned the page. On the stage, the 13th input, floor, remained marked and live. The tape machines labeled A and C rolled without splice. Challenges resolved themselves into the human. In the canteen, a cook fainted at the serving line. Her pulse returned on the count of 3. A driver vomited quietly outside and smoked afterward without taste. His badge said wheat, though he hauled nothing. A nurse in the hospital recorded a cluster of migraines between 15:10 and 15:40. She drew a small box around the time and later erased the box. A tram stalled against no incline. The controller logged collector icing in dry weather and moved the car by hand with 3 colleagues, while sparrows faced the entrance of the hall and did not fly. Political tension remained off-camera but bled through receipts. A telegram from Moscow moved the evening session forward by 20 minutes to accommodate broadcast considerations, though no broadcast was scheduled. A second telegram from a ministry with laboratories asked for confirmation of cadence ratified. The reply, unsigned, read, line affirmed. A directive to the jammers added, avoid continuous carriers, interleave weave with null at 1730 plus AO2. The chart shows the null. The room does not record a change. International response arrived as inquiries without nouns. The Leningrad monitoring station noted, period of professional quiet in Ural sector, and forwarded to 2 addresses abroad. A pouch clerk stamped, received, and filed it under hydro. In Prague, a friendly voice on a friendly line asked whether Sverdlovsk's Culture Week required interpreters. The answer praised provincial vigor and named a brass band. At Koltsovo, a Soviet-made camera on a foreign neck looked toward the cordon and was gently turned to admire a fountain that had been shut off. Casualty figures, if the word applies, stayed internal. A tally at the House of Culture's clinic listed 3 faint, 1 fall, 2 nosebleeds. The 9th Directorate's incident sheet noted 1 attempt to enter cordon by bicycle, redirected. A kennel report, blank at noon, carries at 16 O's a single line, dogs moved, and no destination. In a boarding house ledger under river, a room number is crossed out and replaced by another. The concierge's note says, linen changed twice, and nothing else. Weather tightened its circle. Thunder walked the horizon with measured patience. Rain arrived on the dot of the advanced evening session and struck blackout velvet like a hand on a drum. Inside, microphones registered droplets as a hiss, and the sound man wrote rain and then room because the latter persisted when the former tired. The power curve fell for the last time at 1740 with industrial grace. The man from Moscow signed continue once more on a blank line. The stage manager ticked strike after dark and underscored it twice. By dusk, rumor had outpaced streets. Congress in the closed city, said a tram conductress softly. Rehearsal of the line, answered a passenger who had not been asked. Names? Functions. A boy on the curb counted buses until his mother touched his sleeve and he stopped at 9. In the hospital, the nurse folded her notebook and wrote, T. In the hall, the radiator stayed warm without speaking. The crisis, such as it was, had been to keep a city from learning a schedule. The solution looked like weather and was logged as culture. The evening would pass without applause. The night would begin with curtains that remembered their weight. Night made the hall honest. At 20:05, the curtain swallowed rain and returned it as a breath. Blackout velvet drank streetlight until the room had only itself. The dispatcher's panel drew a last smooth rise, highest by a sliver, and the diesel behind house number 5 idled without needing to. The 13th input, floor, hardened from marked into present. On tape, droplets ceased to be weather and became a steady hush, under which the room placed something like a note. Translators, obedient to employment, produced language in parallel, affirm, harmonize, cadence, functions, and heard their own words return a half-beat late, as if the room corrected diction. A stenographer, who by training writes whatever a mouth risks, pressed the pencil so hard on room that the graphite clamped and the page shone. The moment of highest attendance contained no faces. Delegations arranged themselves not by sector, but by mass. Power near the aisles, bread down front, metrology mid-hall with notebooks closed, as if to measure without instruments. Military observers, 1, 3, or none, sat like commas. The stage manager dimmed house to assembly and raised rostrum to wash. The electrician under the platform withdrew his hand because the beam he had been feeling grew warm between notes, as if attending. The jammers shifted to a braid with scheduled nulls, the nulls printed on the chart and not on tape. Outside, the city synchronized in courtesy. Trams reached stops and hesitated a breath. Nurses woke from 10-minute naps at exactly the bell no one rang. A fox crossed the square in a straight line, counting fences with its feet. Koltsovo pushed a special to the runway, lit the center line, then brought the aircraft back like a thought you decide not to say aloud. Rain ticked on blackout cloth in 31-beat sentences, and then forgot grammar. Inside, something that is not a speech completed itself. No applause. The floor cooled a fraction. Translators removed headsets without touching ear pads. Stenographers tore the top sheet, room, and slid it under the next blank page as if filing silence beneath possibility. The sound man labeled reels A and C, hall, evening, struck through speech and did not throw the slips away. The man from Moscow placed continue under a line that would hold strike after dark and folded the paper once in his hand before laying it down. Peak brought losses of a bureaucratic kind. A box of credentials, river, graphite, bread, went missing and later turned up in a broom closet, the pins magnetized enough to lift filings. 2 headsets were logged, broken, no side tone, though channel AUX had never granted return. A kennel ledger acquired dogs moved, struck. The arrow was drawn with a ruler. The power dispatcher's copy of the last curve, smudged by a sleeve, looked like a river with memory. In the boarding house, a room under wheat was found with linen changed twice and tea glasses stacked in 3s. And then the high point passed as if it had never learned the word. Curtains remembered their weight. Security loosened after the rain without changing positions. The diesel behind the hall ran out its courtesy minute and stopped. The jammers unbraided the reserve band and filed "Maintenance complete." On Koltsovo's ramp, stairs rolled away from a silent fuselage. In kitchens, kettles cooled. In notebooks, tea sufficed for history. The city let the breath go that it had held all day and pretended that the exhale was weather. Inside, reels spun down. On the floor, warmth retreated from the palms that had learned it. On paper, room remained, dented into the next page. Morning replaced curtains with paperwork. Orders to strike arrived stamped and late. Stagehands disassembled platforms with faces like blank pages. Screws in coffee tins sang faintly when tapped. The hall reopened as a house of culture with a schedule of films and a poster for a wind ensemble pinned over tape residue that had once held a banner. A clerk from the repertory office counted chairs and found 12 short, the number of microphones yesterday, then counted again until arithmetic obeyed. A requisition asked for routine repairs to rostrum beams, slight heat warping, and was approved with unusual speed. Resistance took the shape of inventory. The sound man asked to duplicate reels A and C for educational use and received permission to copy tone bursts only. His splices were returned as blank leader. His carbons came back smelling of acetone and summer rain. He kept the paper slips with speech, struck through under a drawer liner, and told himself it was luck when mice left them. The stenographer, who had written room until the page shone, pressed the dented sheets under others and began to file silence by date. At home, she taught her child not to count out loud before breakfast. Adaptation looked like maintenance. The power dispatcher redrew the day's 3 smooth hills as if they were boiler tests and pinned them under factory norms. The electrician chalked a cross on a beam and promised himself he would sand it later. He did not. The translators wrote a memo recommending lessons learned. Test AUX with prose, not numbers. Rotate yawns. Acquire cloth for ear pads. The memo returned with the word yawns replaced by rest periods and AUX by backup. The kennel ledger, which yesterday grew an arrow, received a new page, and the old one went missing. Rumor learned figures of speech. They convened functions, not people, said a tram conductor, punching tickets with the rhythm of the room. They tuned the hall, said a violinist from the wind ensemble, and then laughed at himself because he knew the words were wrong together. A janitor said curtains drink light, and that the velvet looked sated. In kitchens, the rule propagated, do not enumerate before 9:30. A boy, caught counting buses to himself, stopped at 9 when his mother touched his sleeve. The bus that would have been 10 slowed, then chose a different route. Improvisation became policy. The newspaper announced Culture Week retrospectives in lieu of editorials. The radio replayed the child's chorus as if to exhale the key the hall had preferred. A ministry guide for houses of culture included, without emphasis, advice on acoustic drapery for civic events and avoiding continuous carriers in internal relay. The jammer's schedule shifted its weave so that the null at 17:30 would never quite coincide with the hour. The order said, maintenance, and wore the scent of iodine. Psychology registered in small repairs. The nurse who had boxed migraines into a half hour bought a copper bracelet and hid it beneath her cuff. The boarding house concierge rewrote guest cards with surnames in a steady hand and kept one that still read River at the bottom of the drawer. The dispatcher began to wake at 09:10 on days with nothing special and lay still until the minute forgot him. The electrician crossing the hall after hours laid his palm once more on the beam and felt, or imagined, coolness where warmth had been, like a room after a crowd leaves. Partisan documents appeared and vanished. A duplicated leaflet, What Happened in House Number 5, quoted no one and listed the day's receipts: buses, bread, kilowatts. It suggested listening to stairwells in civic buildings and keeping knives wrapped. The leaflet was collected politely by men who wore their sleeves long. Its staples left 2 bright points in corkboards. A cassette labeled Hall Evening circulated between friends. Under the hiss, 3 breaths lined up with thunder, then never again. The tape was hissier each time it returned. By the week's end, the hall hosted a school wind concert. Parents clapped, a clarinet squeaked, the velvet behaved. Yet at 20:05, when the program ran late, the foyer clock paused a breath, and the doorman, who did not wear a watch, found his hand on the radiator. He knocked 3 times and then smiled, because habits keep men standing. The next morning, he folded the requisition for routine repairs into a smaller square and tucked it behind the register. On the line where names should be, the functions had faded, but the dents remained. The city learned to step around that spot in the pavement where someone had once stood to count. The turning came dressed as renovations. A decree reclassified House Number 5 for modernization. Scaffolds rose, velvet came down, and the rostrum beams were sistered with new timber that smelled of lemon and policy. Work orders specified removal of auxiliary cabling and replacement of floor segment over stage cavity. The electrician watched a square of wood lift like a lid and reveal nothing but dust, a coil end bright as a coin, and a pencil line that read, "Do not count." He looked away, and when he looked back, the line was sanded thin until only the dent remained. The diesel behind the hall was decommissioned for inefficiency. Its fuel was siphoned into drums that wore the word maintenance in a hand he recognized and chose not to name. An audit consumed the day's receipts. The dispatcher's 3 smooth hills were retyped as Trial of Factory Reserve. The kennel ledger's arrow became a torn leaf. The clinic's tally condensed into minor episodes, non-reportable. The canteen's soup and bread folded into Culture Week supplies. In the regional archive, dictation discs labeled Hall were placed in a carton marked Floods. A young archivist wrote a card for the catalog and pressed hard enough to bruise Room. When the card was photographed, the bruise did not print. Official denials hardened into education. Schools received a primer on civic acoustics that advised avoid overdamping and respect frequencies of public comfort, a sentence that made band directors scratch their ears. A broadcast from the archives aired a speech by a leader from another year and another city and called it Sverdlovsk culture. The soundtrack carried a room that was not the one on the film. A minister praised cadence of industry, then corrected the noun to rhythm and smiled as if nouns were schedulable. Repercussions moved like drafts. 2 translators were reassigned to foreign trade. Their memos came back in languages that refused rooms. The stenographer who kept dents under sheets found her drawer empty and a new pad waiting. She wrote room on the first line by reflex and tore it off and hid it in her coat. The sound man asked again to keep a copy for educational use and received a letter that said, "No audience," underlined twice. The janitor was replaced by a younger man with clean hands who did not knock radiators. The city learned to call the week by weather. It was hot, they said, even when it rained. Thunder walked around. A nurse told her daughter to hum in stairwells, not to count. A driver who had idled 3 loops around the square left a coin on the floor of the empty hall when it reopened and did not return to look for it. The coin tarnished in a circle. What broke was not denial, but appetite. A proposal to replicate the Convocation model in Kuibyshev moved through 4 desks and dissolved. Requisitions for blackout velvet in Chelyabinsk arrived late and miscolored. A draft schedule for functions of the Volga returned with page numbers and no text. A KGB major whose signature had traveled on suitcases sent up a report that smelled of iodine and regret. Public listlessness improved by culture and weather. Cadence affirmed, enumeration avoided. Recommend no copy. In the margin, a pencil had pressed 3 dots and rubbed them to gloss. At dusk on the first reopening, a youth theater performed a comedy. Laughter found its mark, applause landed on time, the foyer clock behaved. Yet at 20:05, a pause entered the stairwell like a guest who knows the route. The doorman, new, felt his palm cool on the rail and thought briefly of drills. He did not knock. The pause left. Parents collected children who had drawn banners with ribbons left blank. Streetlight returned to being streetlight. The turning had not erased the week. It had taught the hall to pass as ordinary. The city accepted, like people do when rooms decide to keep a secret that everyone has already learned. Outside, the square kept a scuff no rain could quite lift. Inside, the new floor sat over an emptiness that was only emptiness if you refused to admit wood can remember heat. Aftermath learned to file itself. A municipal brochure billed the renovations as improvements to community culture, page punched and smiling. The photograph showed children with balloons and a curtain that had never drunk thunder. The foyer clock was replaced with LED digits that disapproved of pauses. A plaque near the ticket window praised volunteerism during Culture Week, a noun that did not belong to the country of that year. The sound man retired to a smaller apartment and kept, tucked into a book about acoustics, 2 paper slips with speech struck through. He practiced not telling his granddaughter why the word mattered by omission. Withdrawal took practical forms. The reserve bands went quiet. The jammer's weave lost its scheduled nulls and fell into maintenance. The power dispatcher's desk learned new curves unrelated to halls. Koltsovo's ramp men returned to naming stairs by paint chips, and specials meant generals again. The diesel behind the hall was cut and craned into a yard where parts weather into anonymity. The kennel ledger was replaced with a fresh volume. Dogs Moved remained only as a split fiber on a torn page. In the archive, floods swallowed room entirely when boxes migrated to a higher shelf against spring thaw. Immediate consequences wore civility. The translators received certificates and a set of stainless spoons. The stenographer was commended for availability and moved to a bureau that filed petitions. Her first day, she wrote "room" on the first line of a form and turned it in without noticing. A driver died years later with a folder in his closet labeled "wheat." Inside, only bus schedules and a postcard of a fountain taken the weak water had been turned off. The hall's exterior accepted a fresh coat the color of argument. Windows that had been papered opened onto air that pretended never to have listened, yet details refused to unlearn. The beam under the rostrum took screws reluctantly, as if remembering weight. A certain draft returned on evenings when programs ran late and laid a cool hand across the rail at 20:05. The electrician, now a visitor, attended a youth orchestra and when the audience exhaled between movements, tasted iodine. He laughed at himself and did not stay for the reception. Reprisals, if they were that, came disguised. A clerk who had stamped functions in lieu of names found her personnel file thinned and a notation about imprecision. The major with suitcases retired to a city without halls and woke, once a year, with his hand on a radiator at a minute that did not belong to clocks. A rumor traveled that a second convocation had been attempted in a Volga city and had ended on the freight platform with coaches circling until diesel ran out. The rumor learned to deny itself by adding laughter. Humanitarian language did not fit. There were no bodies to count, no lists to publish. But there was exhaustion that sat you down on a bench where drivers had slept, and there were women who closed their eyes over soup and saw velvet breathe. There were headaches boxed on notebook pages and rubbed away. There was a school child who painted a banner with a ribbon left blank and called it homework. The city learned to live with dents, the way people live with scars they cannot always find. The last report worth reading is unsigned, printed faintly, filed under Ural Region, Culture. Weather events and scheduling have been reconciled, it says. Public calm has improved. A line below, in pencil pressed until graphite shines. Cadence affirmed, enumeration avoided, rehearsal struck, memory present. The copy made for the central card catalog does not show the pencil. The original remains in a drawer that sticks in damp. At night, long after Ordinary had returned to the timetable, a guard walked the corridor and paused by the stage door, feeling for a draft he could put in his report. The hinge breathed a polite syllable and said nothing else. He wrote "door fits" in his notebook and went on. In the square, a late tram took the corner cleanly, sparks brief and honest. On the roofline, sparrows faced no special door. The hall slept as buildings do, with an ear open for the sentence it once refused to remember. The city slept as cities do, counting only what was printed and waking when the radiator decided. The vacuum in the calendar remained, a week labeled culture that had the gravity of an event. Whether it had been a congress of functions or a rehearsal for something that learned to pass as weather depended on which drawer you opened and how much you believed the dents under the top sheet. The last bus idled, then shut down, courteous as a stagehand. The plaque under the ticket window gathered fingerprints that looked like commas and refused to resolve into names. They tried to close it with pedagogy. A handbook for cultural workers, revised and discreet, advised manage room tone, balance frequencies of comfort, schedule breaks to discourage enumeration. The words sat on shelves like unlabeled tins. A visiting delegation from another era toured House Number 5 and praised its restored civic mission. They took photographs at noon, when velvet is only cloth and rails only rails. The docent pointed to a framed poster, Wind Ensemble, hung exactly where the banner had once left tape ghosts. She said nothing about diesel or jammers or the word cadence pressed into a page hard enough to shine. What endures is furniture and grammar. Drivers still nap on benches during summer heat. A few wake at 9:10 without alarms and smile at the coincidence. Translators pass the building and touch their pockets for headsets they have not owned in years. The stenographer, gray now, keeps a single sheet in an envelope in her pantry, a page that reads room and nothing else. Sometimes at night she takes it out and feels the dents under the word, as if touch could restore a sentence the room withheld. The electrician sits 2 rows from the back and lays his palm on his knee at 20:05, a gesture his body learned and refuses to unlearn. The archive has learned to wear disguises. Flood swallows hall, culture swallows convocation, maintenance logs overwrite load curves, kennel ledgers acquire neat gaps. A cassette labeled Evening survives as a hiss that carries 3 breaths where thunder once timed its steps. A digital copy refuses to open on modern machines and returns a polite error in a language without nouns. A blueprint on onion skin shows a rostrum and 12 circles and a rectangle labeled floor. The pencil that wrote "Do not count" left only a bruise. Paper keeps bruises longer than institutions keep memory. Outside, myth consolidates. They tuned a city, someone says on a tram. They counted functions, answers another. And then both laugh because laughter is a safe word. A child draws a stage with a blank ribbon and is told to add notes. He draws sparrows on a wire instead. A woman passing the square forgets the name of the street and remembers the smell of varnish and iodine and the way thunder walked around. At Koltsovo, a ramp man names stairs by paint chips again. Yet once, in rain, he watches a special push to the threshold and return as if a thought had been withdrawn. The museum proposal resurfaces every few years, Interactive History of Culture Week, and dies in committee where budgets are decisions. No one writes opposition. The margin accumulates 3 dots that gloss under fingers. The plaque under the ticket window gathers fingerprints that look like commas. Tourists ask about a congress. Guides say festival. Locals say weather. So did a congress occur? Or did rooms learn to carry policy without speaking? Did a closed city host a roll call of nouns and then strike it before applause? Or did something older borrow the party's grammar and a hall's lungs to rehearse itself as ordinary? The dossier does not agree with itself. It smells of paste and coins, of rain on velvet, of rails that once tasted like schedules. It offers load curves and soup counts and a radiator that warmed in even rises, and between them a sentence that begins and never arrives at subject. At night, the foyer clock, now LED and insistent, refuses to pause, but the corridor still learns a brief cool at 20:05 on evenings that run long. Men do not knock radiators, yet sometimes their fingers hover as if remembering manners. On certain days, thunder walks around. On certain pages, dents outlast ink. You can call it culture, rehearsal, weather, or you can admit that a week in a calendar behaves like a door left ajar. Behind it, a hall holds its breath the length of a sentence that was never said aloud. Whether the Union erased a Congress or a city, or whether both were covers for something that liked rooms and disliked names, remains a matter of policy, which is another word for silence.